The unseen visitor. Jack was standing by his BBQ grill, flipping burgers and chatting with his friends. It was a warm summer evening, and the air smelled like smoky meat and fresh-cut grass. His backyard was alive with laughter, and the sound of music playing softly from a small speaker. It was the perfect evening, or so it seemed. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, and a cool breeze swept across the yard. Jack's dog, Max, a loyal German shepherd, suddenly stood stiff. His ears perked up, and he let out a low growl, staring into the woods behind the house. Jack glanced at Max and frowned. "What's up, boy?" he asked, trying to keep his tone light, but something about Max's behavior made his chest tighten. "Relax, Jack," his friend Tony said, taking a bite of his burger. "Probably just a raccoon or something." Jack nodded but couldn't shake the unease creeping over him. The woods had always been quiet, and nothing unusual ever happened around here. But tonight felt different. The lights hanging on the trees around the yard flickered for a moment, catching everyone's attention. "That's weird," muttered Sarah, one of Jack's friends, looking up at the string lights. "Is there a power outage?" Jack shook his head. "No, everything else is fine." He pointed toward the house, where the kitchen lights still glowed steadily. Then it happened. A low, humming sound, faint but strange, came from deep within the woods. It wasn't like anything Jack had heard before. It wasn't the sound of an animal or even a machine. It was otherworldly. The laughter and chatter died down as everyone turned to look at the trees. The air seemed to grow colder, and Jack felt a shiver run down his spine. "What the heck is that?" whispered Tony, his burger now forgotten. Jack set his spatula down and took a step toward the woods. "Stay here," he said firmly, though his voice betrayed his nervousness. Max barked once, then growled again, standing protectively by Jack's side. "Are you sure that's a good idea?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling slightly. Jack didn't respond. His curiosity and a strange sense of responsibility pushed him forward. He grabbed a flashlight from the patio table and clicked it on. The beam of light cut through the darkness as he stepped closer to the trees. The humming grew louder. It was rhythmic, almost like a pulse. Jack's heart raced, and he tightened his grip on the flashlight. Max barked again, louder this time, and ran a few steps ahead before stopping abruptly. "Max, come back," Jack called out, but the dog just stood there, growling. And then she appeared. At first, Jack thought it was some kind of trick. His flashlight landed on a tall figure emerging from the shadows of the trees. She was unlike anything, or anyone, he had ever seen. Her skin shimmered faintly, like silver dust under the moonlight. Her eyes glowed with a soft blue light, and her long hair seemed to flow as if carried by a gentle breeze, even though the air was still. Jack froze. He could hear his friends gasping behind him, but he couldn't take his eyes off her. The woman, if she could be called that, stood tall, her presence commanding yet strangely calming. She looked directly at him, her glowing eyes piercing through the darkness. Max, who had been growling moments ago, sat down quietly, as if the stranger's presence had soothed him. "Who are you?" Jack managed to ask, his voice barely above a whisper. He didn't expect an answer, but the woman tilted her head slightly, studying him. Then she spoke, her voice soft but clear, like a melody carried on the wind. "You are the one." Jack blinked. The one? The one for what? His mind raced, trying to make sense of the situation. The woman stepped closer, and the shimmering glow of her skin became more pronounced. She stopped a few feet away from him, her gaze never wavering. "You are my chosen mate," she said simply, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. Jack felt like the ground had just shifted beneath his feet. His friends behind him erupted into whispers and gasps, but he barely heard them. All he could do was stare at the strange woman who had just turned his ordinary evening upside down. "I don't understand," he said, his voice shaking now. "Who are you? What are you?" The woman placed a hand over her chest and spoke her name. "I am Lyra," she said, "and I have traveled far to find you." Jack's mind reeled. This had to be a joke, a dream, or something else entirely. But the way she looked at him, the strange hum in the air, and the way Max had stopped growling, all of it felt real. Too real. Before he could say another word, a sudden noise came from the woods. It was a loud rustling, followed by a deep guttural growl. Jack turned his flashlight toward the trees, and his heart skipped a beat. Something, or someone, else was out there. Who, or what is she? The backyard was eerily silent. Jack stood frozen, his flashlight trembling slightly in his hand. The strange alien woman, Lyra, had just called him her chosen mate, and everyone was too stunned to speak. Behind him, Jack could hear his friends whispering nervously, their voices filled with disbelief. But Lyra wasn't looking at them anymore. Her glowing eyes were locked on something deeper in the woods. Jack noticed her posture shift, calm but alert, as if she were expecting danger. "What's out there?" Jack asked, his voice breaking the heavy silence. Lyra didn't answer right away. Instead, she raised her hand, her fingers moving delicately in the air, as though she were feeling something invisible. "They'd followed me," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Who? Followed you where?" Jack demanded. His pulse quickened as he stared into the dark woods, searching for whatever she was sensing. Max, his dog, stood stiffly by his side, his ears pinned back in fear. Lyra turned to him, her silver-toned skin shimmering faintly in the moonlight. "You must trust me, Jack," she said firmly. "Your life is no longer ordinary. They know I found you." Jack blinked, trying to process her words. "Who's they? What's going on here?" Before Lyra could answer, a loud rustling sound came from the trees, followed by a guttural growl that sent a chill down Jack's spine. His friends screamed and backed away toward the house, some dropping their drinks in panic. Max barked furiously, his stance rigid and protective. Jack took a step back, his flashlight beam darting nervously across the tree line. The growl came again, closer this time. And then, silence. Inside, Lyra ordered, her voice suddenly commanding. Jack hesitated but grabbed Max's collar and began moving toward the house. His friends were already scrambling through the patio door, slamming it shut behind them. But as Jack reached the porch steps, he stopped and turned to Lyra. "You're coming too, right?" She hesitated, her glowing eyes narrowing. "I cannot. They will follow my energy. If I stay, your home will not be safe." Jack clenched his jaw, torn between fear and a strange pull to protect this mysterious woman. "Then what do you expect me to do? Just leave you out here?" Lyra stepped closer, her voice softening. "You are not like the others, Jack. You are brave. I see it in you. But you must listen. These beings will not stop until they take me. And if they find you with me, they will take you too." Jack opened his mouth to argue, but before he could, the tree line erupted. Two shadowy figures, tall and monstrous, burst into the clearing. Their forms were vaguely humanoid but distorted, with glowing red eyes and sharp claws that glinted under the moonlight. "Run," Lyra yelled, and without thinking, Jack obeyed. Suspense built up inside the house. Jack slammed the door shut behind him, bolting it and leaning against it as he caught his breath. His friends huddled near the windows, peeking out cautiously. Sarah grabbed Jack's arm, her voice shaking. "What is she, Jack? And what are those things?" Jack didn't answer. He couldn't. His mind raced with questions of his own. He looked out the window just in time to see Lyra standing in the yard, her body glowing brighter now. The shadowy figures closed in on her, their red eyes gleaming with malice. Instead of running, Lyra raised her hands, and an otherworldly light erupted from her palms, sending the creatures skidding back into the trees. Jack's jaw dropped. This wasn't just a visitor from another planet. She was something far more powerful and far more dangerous, hunted by the unknown. The air felt heavy, as if the entire world was holding its breath. Jack stood at the window, his eyes fixed on the tree line where Lyra had disappeared moments ago. Outside, the night was alive with an unnatural tension. The creatures she had warned him about were still out there. He could feel it. Behind him, his friends whispered in fear, their voices barely audible. Tony paced back and forth, running his hand through his hair. "Jack, what are we going to do? That thing, whatever she is, brought trouble here. This is your fault." "Quiet," Jack snapped, his voice sharp enough to silence the room. He didn't have time for arguments. His mind was racing, trying to piece together what was happening. Lyra had said those creatures wouldn't stop until they had her. But why? And what did any of this have to do with him? Before he could think any further, Max barked loudly, his claws scratching against the wooden floor. The dog was staring at the back door, growling deep in his throat. Jack's heart sank. Something was out there. "Get away from the windows," Jack ordered, his voice low but firm. His friends hesitated, fear written all over their faces, but they obeyed. Jack grabbed the flashlight he had left on the counter and motioned for Max to stay close. "Jack, you're not seriously going out there, are you?" Sarah's voice trembled. "I don't have a choice," Jack muttered. "If they're out there, we need to know what we're dealing with." The encounter in the backyard. Jack stepped cautiously onto the patio, the flashlight beam slicing through the darkness. The night was unnervingly quiet now, the earlier hum replaced by a suffocating stillness. Max stayed at his side, his ears perked and his body tense. Jack's breath caught as he saw it. Burn marks on the grass near the tree line. Circular patterns scorched into the earth, glowing faintly as if they were alive. He crouched down to get a closer look, his fingers hovering over the strange symbols. They were unlike anything he'd ever seen. "What the hell is this?" Jack whispered to himself. "They're marks of a hunt," a voice said behind him. Jack spun around, nearly dropping the flashlight. Lyra stood there, her skin glowing faintly in the dark. Her expression was grim, and there was a new urgency in her voice. "They've marked this place as a target. They know I'm here." Jack gestured toward the scorch marks. "What are these things, Lyra? What do they want from you?" Lyra hesitated, her glowing eyes scanning the tree line. "They're not just hunters. They're enforcers, sent to capture or kill anyone who defies the laws of my world. I've broken those laws to come here, Jack. And now, they won't stop until they've destroyed me, and anyone who stands in their way." The threat emerges. Before Jack could ask more, a low growl rumbled through the air, sending a chill down his spine. It came from the woods, deep, guttural, and inhuman. Lyra's posture stiffened. Her eyes narrowed as she scanned the darkness. "They're here," she said softly. Jack's flashlight flickered, and then he saw it, a pair of glowing red eyes staring at him from the shadows. The creature stepped forward, its form monstrous and twisted, like a nightmarish version of a man. Its long claws gleamed in the dim light, and its teeth were sharp enough to tear through steel. Jack took an instinctive step back. "What the hell is that thing?" "A seeker," Lyra replied. "It's only the first of many." The seeker lunged forward, its speed terrifying. Jack barely had time to react before Lyra raised her hand, and a burst of bright, blue energy erupted from her palm. The creature howled as it was thrown backward, crashing into a tree with a sickening thud. But even as it lay motionless, Jack could hear more growls echoing from the woods. "They're coming," Lyra said, her voice calm but firm. She turned to Jack, her glowing eyes locking onto his. "We have to leave. Now." The decision to fight back. Jack's heart raced. "Leave? Go where?" "They'll just follow us, won't they?" "They'll follow me," Lyra corrected. "If I go alone, you and your friends might be safe." Jack shook his head, his jaw tightening. "No, I'm not letting you face them alone. Not after everything I've seen." Lyra seemed surprised by his response, but she didn't argue. Instead, she handed him a small metallic device from her belt. It was cold and surprisingly heavy in his hand. "What is this?" Jack asked. "It's an energy trigger," Lyra explained. "Aim and press the center. It won't kill them, but it will buy us time." Jack stared at the device, then at Lyra. He didn't know why he trusted her. Maybe it was the way she spoke, or the fact that she had risked herself to protect him and his friends. Either way, he made his decision. "All right," he said. "We fight together." The truth about the bond. The night air smelled of smoke and singed grass. The battlefield behind Jack's house was littered with glowing scorch marks and the lifeless forms of the creatures Lyra called seekers. Jack leaned against the porch railing, his breathing ragged. His hand still trembled from gripping the alien device Lyra had given him. He had never fought for his life like this before. Inside the house, his friends sat huddled together, too frightened to speak. The once lively BBQ now felt like a distant memory, replaced by a nightmare none of them could escape. Lyra sat on the ground a few feet away, her shimmering skin dimmer than before. Her glow flickered weakly, and her breathing was shallow. Jack couldn't ignore the guilt gnawing at him. She had saved him. Again. But she looked like she was paying the price. "You're hurt," Jack said, crouching beside her. "What can I do? How can I help?" Lyra shook her head slowly. "It's not something you can fix," she whispered, her voice weak but steady. "Their weapons disrupt my energy. I'll recover, but I need time." Jack sat back, running a hand through his hair. "Time? We don't have time, Lyra. You said more of them are coming." She looked up at him, her glowing blue eyes filled with a strange mix of exhaustion and determination. "We do have time, if you're willing to hear the truth." Jack frowned. "The truth? About what?" "About us," Lyra said softly. The bond revealed. Lyra took a deep breath, her glow pulsing faintly. "I came here for a reason, Jack. Not by chance, not by accident. I was drawn to you." Jack blinked, confused. "Drawn to me? What are you talking about?" "My people," Lyra began, her voice steady despite her weakened state, "have a way of connecting with others, beings across the galaxy. We search for something rare, something unique, something only humans have." Jack raised an eyebrow. "And what's that?" Lyra's glowing eyes softened. "Emotion. Compassion. Resilience. Humans feel deeply, in ways most species can't. It's why your kind fights for each other, even when the odds are impossible. That's why I was sent here, to find someone like you." Jack's heart pounded in his chest. "Find me? For what? What do you want from me?" Lyra hesitated, then said, "A bond. My people call it the eternal thread. It's not random. It's a connection, one that can't be broken once it's formed. And Jack, I've chosen you." Jack's shock and conflict. Jack felt like the ground had just been ripped out from under him. He stood up, pacing back and forth as he tried to process her words. "Chosen me? For what exactly? To be some kind of partner? Protector? What does this even mean?" Lyra stood slowly, her glowing form flickering like a dying flame. "It means you're bound to me, Jack. Your courage, your heart, they're what my people believe in. You've already proven it by standing with me against the Seekers. But this bond, it goes beyond protection. It's deeper than that." Jack stopped pacing and stared at her. "Deeper? You mean like—" "Yes," Lyra said, cutting him off. "A bond of the soul. A union of minds and hearts. In my world, it's sacred." Jack's mind raced. This was insane. Just hours ago, he'd been flipping burgers at a BBQ, and now an alien woman was telling him he was her chosen mate. None of it made sense. "This is crazy," he muttered. "You've got the wrong guy. I'm just Jack. I'm not a hero. I'm not some special person. You must have made a mistake." "There is no mistake," Lyra said firmly. "The bond doesn't lie. And Jack, She stepped closer, her glowing eyes locking onto his. Whether you believe it or not, you've already begun to feel it too, haven't you? Jack opened his mouth to argue, but he couldn't. Deep down, he knew she was right. There was something about her, something he couldn't explain. It wasn't just her otherworldly beauty or her mysterious powers. It was the way she looked at him, the way she trusted him, even when she barely knew him. He felt it in his chest, like an invisible thread pulling him closer to her. The danger of the bond. Okay, Jack said finally, his voice low. Let's say I believe you. Let's say this bond thing is real. What happens now? What do we do about the Seekers? About everything. Lyra's expression grew serious. The Seekers are only the beginning, Jack. Once my people realize I've bonded with a human, they'll come too. They won't understand. They'll see it as a betrayal. Jack frowned. A betrayal. Why? Lyra hesitated, then said, because my people don't believe in humans. They see you as primitive, reckless, and dangerous. But I see the truth. I see what you're capable of. That's why I came here. Jack took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. So what you're saying is, this bond you've made with me just put a giant target on both our backs. Lyra nodded. Yes. But together, we can survive this. The bond makes us stronger. If we work as one, we can face whatever comes. Jack looked at her, his mind a whirlwind of thoughts. He didn't ask for any of this, but now it felt like he had no choice. The bond wasn't just her choice, it was his too. All right, he said finally. I don't know how this is going to work, but I'm with you. Whatever happens, we'll face it together. Lyra smiled faintly, her glow flickering but steady. Thank you, Jack. You're braver than you know. Fighting back. The silence was suffocating. Jack crouched behind the overturned patio table, his heart pounding so loudly he was sure it would give them away. Lyra knelt beside him, her skin faintly glowing in the dark. The alien device she'd handed him earlier buzzed softly in his palm, its strange energy making his fingers tingle. Through the shattered window, Jack could see them, 3 hulking figures prowling the yard. They were different from the Seekers they had faced earlier, bigger, faster, and armed with weapons that pulsed with crimson light. These weren't mere hunters. They were enforcers. They're scanning the area, Lyra whispered, her voice barely audible. If they detect us, they'll destroy everything in their path. Jack swallowed hard, trying to keep his breathing steady. And what's the plan, exactly? Hide until they give up. No, Lyra said firmly. She turned her glowing eyes to him, her expression fierce. We fight. Jack stared at her, his jaw tightening. Fight? With what? That thing you gave me barely slowed them down last time. Lyra placed her hand over his, her touch warm and steadying. This time, we don't just fight them. We outsmart them. Setting the trap. Lyra led Jack through the darkened house, her movements swift and silent. His friends stayed behind, huddled in a corner, too scared to protest. Jack couldn't blame them. He was scared too. But there was something about Lyra's presence, her calm determination, that gave him a sliver of hope. She stopped near the back door and pulled a small metallic sphere from her belt. It glowed faintly, and strange symbols lit up on its surface as she tapped it. What is that? Jack asked. A disruptor, Lyra said. It'll interfere with their tracking systems, but only for a few minutes. We have to use that time wisely. Jack nodded, his grip tightening on the alien device. Okay, what's the plan? Lyra's eyes met his, and for a moment, he saw something deeper, something vulnerable. We lure them into the woods, she said. Away from your friends, away from your home. And then, we take them down. Jack took a deep breath. All right, let's do it. The chase begins. The plan was simple but dangerous. Jack and Lyra would draw the enforcers' attention, leading them into the dense forest where the disruptor could give them an advantage. It was risky, but staying in the house was certain death. Jack stepped onto the porch first, his flashlight flickering as he waved it wildly to get the enforcer's attention. "Hey," he shouted. "Looking for us." The creatures turned immediately, their glowing red eyes locking onto him. They let out guttural roars that sent a chill down Jack's spine. "Move," Lyra yelled, grabbing his arm and pulling him toward the woods. The enforcers gave chase, their heavy footsteps shaking the ground. Jack could feel the weight of their pursuit, their sheer size and power making every instinct in his body scream to run faster. But this wasn't just a retreat, it was a trap. The battle in the forest. As they reached the dense trees, Lyra activated the disruptor. The air around them shimmered faintly, and the enforcers slowed, their movements becoming jerky and uncoordinated. "Now," Lyra shouted. Jack raised the alien device she had given him, aiming it at the nearest enforcer. He pressed the center button, and a beam of crackling blue energy shot out, striking the creature in the chest. It howled in pain, staggering backward, but it didn't fall. "They're stronger than the Seekers," Jack yelled, his voice shaking. "Keep going," Lyra commanded. She raised her hands, and a wave of light burst from her palms, slamming into another enforcer. The creature collapsed, its weapon clattering to the ground. But there were still two more. One of them lunged at Jack, its massive claw swiping inches from his face. He dove to the ground, rolling behind a tree. The creature snarled and turned, its glowing eyes burning with rage. "Jack," Lyra called, her voice filled with urgency. "Use the trap." Jack remembered the second device Lyra had handed him earlier, a small metallic disc. He fumbled with it, his hands shaking, and threw it at the enforcer. The disc stuck to the creature's chest and began to pulse with light. A second later, it exploded in a blinding flash, sending the enforcer flying. Jack stared in disbelief. That worked. Lyra smirked, her glow intensifying as she faced the final enforcer. "Told you we'd outsmart them." The final showdown. The forest burned with an eerie crimson glow. Jack's breaths came in short gasps as he leaned against a tree, trying to steady himself. The ground still trembled under the sentinel's approach. It was no longer just a hunt. It was a full-blown war zone. The massive machine loomed in the distance, its red eyes scanning the area like a predator locking onto its prey. "This thing is insane," Jack muttered, gripping the alien weapon in his hand. The device hummed faintly, but he could feel its power fading. "Lyra, what do we do?" Lyra stood a few feet ahead of him, her silver-toned skin shimmering faintly in the chaotic light. She looked smaller now, more fragile, but her expression remained fierce. Her voice was calm, but her words carried the weight of desperation. "The Sentinel is designed for destruction. We can't outrun it. We have to stop it here." Jack's stomach churned. "Stop it. Lyra, that thing's the size of a tank, and we barely survived the enforcers." Lyra turned to him, her glowing blue eyes softening for a moment. "Jack, listen to me. The Sentinel's strength is its size, but its weakness is its core. If we destroy the core, we destroy the machine." Jack blinked, processing her words. "The core? And where exactly is that?" She pointed to the Sentinel, which was now crashing through the trees toward them. "In its chest. But it's shielded. We'll have to overload its defenses." "Great," Jack said sarcastically. "And how exactly do we do that?" Lyra handed him another device, smaller than the others she had given him. It was shaped like a sphere and pulsed with faint blue light. "This is a destabilizer. Attach it to the Sentinel's chest, and it will weaken the shield. Once the shield is down, we attack the core." Jack stared at the device, his heart racing. "You make it sound so simple." "It's not," Lyra admitted, "but it's the only chance we have." The fight begins. The Sentinel's massive form emerged from the shadows, its red eyes locking onto them. It let out a deafening roar, a sound so powerful it shook the trees and sent birds scattering into the night sky. Jack and Lyra didn't wait for it to strike first. They darted in opposite directions, trying to divide its focus. The sentinel responded by raising one of its massive arms, which ended in a cannon-like weapon. A burst of energy shot out, narrowly missing Jack as he dove behind a fallen tree. "Move faster, Jack," Lyra shouted, her voice sharp. "I'm trying." Jack yelled back, scrambling to his feet. He clutched the destabilizer tightly in his hand, his mind racing. How was he supposed to get close enough to that thing without being obliterated? Lyra raised her hands, and a wave of bright blue light shot toward the sentinel. The energy struck its shield, creating a crackling barrier that absorbed the attack. The sentinel roared again, turning its attention to her. "Now, Jack," Lyra yelled. While it's distracted, Jack took a deep breath, his legs trembling as he sprinted toward the sentinel. Its massive frame towered over him, each step it took shaking the ground beneath his feet. He could feel the heat radiating from its core as he got closer, his heart pounding in his chest. With a burst of courage, he leaped onto the sentinel's leg, clinging to the metallic surface as it moved. The machine roared, shaking violently in an attempt to throw him off. Jack gritted his teeth, climbing higher. The turning point. As Jack reached the sentinel's chest, he could see the faint glow of its core beneath the shield. He fumbled with the destabilizer, his sweaty hands making it hard to grip. Come on, he muttered. The sentinel's movements grew more erratic, its massive arms swiping at him. One near miss sent a rush of air past his face, but Jack held on, adrenaline surging through his veins. Finally, he slammed the destabilizer onto the shield. The device latched on and began to pulse with blue light. Sparks flew as the sentinel's shield flickered, the crackling energy surrounding it starting to fade. "It's working," Jack shouted, his voice filled with a mix of relief and terror. Lyra didn't waste a second. She raised her hands, and a massive wave of energy erupted from her palms, slamming into the sentinel's exposed core. The machine let out a deafening roar, its movements growing sluggish. "Jack, get down," Lyra yelled. Jack didn't need to be told twice. He released his grip and dropped to the ground, rolling away just as the sentinel's core began to overload. A blinding light filled the forest, followed by a massive explosion that sent shockwaves rippling through the air. The aftermath. When the dust settled, Jack slowly got to his feet, his ears ringing. The sentinel lay in ruins, its once mighty frame reduced to smoldering debris. He turned to see Lyra standing nearby, her glow faint but steady. "You did it," Jack said, his voice hoarse. "We actually did it." Lyra smiled weakly. "We did it. I couldn't have done this without you." Before Jack could respond, a sudden noise made him freeze. He turned toward the tree line, his heart sinking. More shapes were emerging from the shadows, dozens of them. They weren't seekers or enforcers. These figures were sleek, glowing, and unmistakably alien. Lyra's expression hardened. "They're not here to destroy us." Jack frowned. "Then why are they here?" Lyra looked at him, her glowing eyes filled with a mix of hope and fear. "They're here to take me home." A new beginning. The clearing was silent, save for the hum of the alien ships that hovered above the treetops. Jack stood still, his heart pounding as the glowing alien figures surrounded him and Lyra. The air was heavy with tension, and every instinct in his body screamed at him to fight, to protect her. But Lyra stepped forward, her glow dim but steady. "Stop," she said, her voice firm yet calm. "I'll go with you, but leave him out of this." The leader of the alien group tilted its head, its eyes narrowing as it studied her. "You know that's not possible. He has bonded with you. The human is as much a part of this now as you are." Jack frowned, stepping closer to Lyra. "What are they talking about? What do they want with you?" Lyra turned to him, her glowing eyes filled with regret. "They want to take me back, Jack. To stand trial for what I've done, for breaking our laws, and forming a bond with a human." Jack's chest tightened. "Trial? For what? You saved my life. You fought to protect me. The alien leader's voice cut through the air, cold and commanding. Her actions have endangered not just herself, but our entire species. The bond she has created is forbidden. She must face the consequences. Jack clenched his fists. And what about me? What happens to me if you take her? The leader's gaze shifted to him, and for a moment, it seemed to consider him. The bond will remain incomplete. You will feel its absence for the rest of your life, a void that can never be filled. Lyra's expression twisted with pain. No, she whispered. That's cruel. He didn't ask for this. The leader didn't flinch. It is the price of her rebellion. The impossible decision. Jack's mind raced, trying to find a way out of the impossible situation. He couldn't lose her, not like this. The connection he felt with Lyra was unlike anything he had ever known. It wasn't just the bond she spoke of. It was deeper. She had risked everything for him, and now they wanted to take her away forever. There has to be another way, Jack said, his voice trembling but resolute. If this bond is so dangerous, then let me fix it. Let me stand with her. The leader let out a sharp, echoing laugh. A human. Stand with her. You would not survive in our world. Jack stepped forward, his jaw tightening. Maybe not, but I'm willing to try. Lyra's eyes widened. Jack, no. You don't know what you're saying. I know exactly what I'm saying, Jack replied, his voice steady now. I'm not letting them take you away from me. Not after everything we've been through. The leader studied him in silence for what felt like an eternity. Then it spoke. Very well. If you wish to follow her, you will face the same fate. There will be no return to Earth, no escape from the bond you have created. Jack didn't hesitate. Then I'm going. The departure. The glowing figures moved aside, clearing a path to one of the hovering ships. Lyra looked at Jack, her expression torn between gratitude and sorrow. You don't have to do this, she said softly. Yes, I do, Jack said. This isn't just about the bond, Lyra. It's about you. I'm not letting you face this alone. Lyra's lips trembled, and for the first time, tears glistened in her glowing eyes. Thank you, Jack, for everything. They stepped onto the ship together, the ramp closing behind them. Inside, the air was cool and sterile, and the hum of the engines vibrated through the floor. The other aliens watched them silently, their expressions unreadable. As the ship ascended, Jack glanced out the window. Earth grew smaller and smaller, the lights of his hometown fading into the distance. He felt a pang of sadness, but also a strange sense of peace. He was leaving everything he had ever known, but he wasn't leaving alone. A new world. The ship docked at a massive station orbiting a distant planet. The station glowed with an ethereal light, its structure both alien and beautiful. Jack stepped out, his eyes widening as he took in the sight of towering spires, shimmering bridges, and creatures of all shapes and sizes moving through the bustling corridors. This is where it begins, Lyra said, her voice quiet but hopeful. If we can prove to them that the bond is not a threat, we might have a chance. Jack nodded, his determination unwavering. Then let's prove it. Together.